Hi, good morning. It's 2018, and Guinevere Beck is an aspiring writer and Brown University graduate working on her Master's of Fine Arts in New York City. And this is you from her perspective. One day on her way to class, Beck stops in at Mooney's bookstore seeking out a worker to help her find Paula Fox. She notices that he's kind of cute as he remarks about another customer who's been wandering around the store looking for something legitimate to buy to justify getting a Dan Brown book. Beck admits that people are disappointing rather than just owning what they're into, and she grabs Paula Fox's desperate characters, which the bookstore manager assures lives up to the hype. When she checks out, he reads her name from her credit card, and she explains that her parents were assholes about naming, so everybody just calls her Beck, and he introduces himself as Joe Goldberg before telling her to have a nice day. On her way to the subway, Beck texts her friends about the guy that she met at the bookstore. The encounter makes her reflect on her situationship with Benji and how he treats her, and she asks her friends if it's finally time for her to date somebody that's good for her. She posts a picture to her Instagram of the new book that she bought and hurries off to class. The next day, she spends her morning teaching yoga and then heads to the university to TA a romantics class taught by the pervy Professor Leahy. Later that evening, Beck meets up with her friends Peach, Lynn, and Annika for Annika's birthday dinner, gifting her an expensive scarf that her best friend Peach later confronts her over, knowing that Beck is broke and offering to give her money, but Beck insists that she's fine. Peach invites Beck to tag along with them as they carry on their night, but she heads home to write, immediately ditching her laptop when she gets a text from Benji as he's pulling up in a cab. She lets him in and they argue over her best friend walking in on his illicit bathroom blowjob at a party that she took him to. He denies fault, brushing it off because he was wasted, and starts to complain about his failure of a soda company. Beck tries to tell him that she doesn't have time to keep hooking up because she's drowning in work, but Benji seduces her, saying that he doesn't just want to be somebody she sleeps with, and they fall right into it on the couch. He gets dressed after failing to satisfy Beck and leaves to meet up with his friends, negging her on his way out when he compliments the weight that she's gained. The next day, Beck meets up with her professor, turning in just one page out of the 20 that she owes in assignments. He challenges her to figure out how to get the work done or take her class schedule down to part-time, which Beck points out would jeopardize her position as TA and in turn her student housing. She assures him that she can get the pages to him by the end of the week, and he grants her an extension if she meets up with him for a drink to discuss her writing on Thursday. Beck fakes a smile and agrees, not having much of a choice. When she leaves the meeting and texts Benji that she needs to see him tonight, he can't be bothered to commit to showing up for her. She heads home to shower and wash away the ick from her creepy professor, calling her mom to talk about him and eventually ask for money, but ultimately being left to figure it out. She starts to cry but composes herself when she gets a FaceTime call from Lynn and Peach while they're in a cab, and they invite her out to fix her bad day with copious amounts of alcohol. Beck agrees but insists that they meet her in Greenpoint at an open mic event. She downs a few drinks and confesses to Peach that she invited Benji, and Peach reminds her that Benji is an asshole, but they're interrupted when Beck gets called up to the stage for her performance. She starts reading her poem, struggling as the shots catch up with her, and the audience is unreceptive until somebody heckles Beck for being so sad. Her friends offer no support and Beck leaves, stumbling her way to the subway alone as they go on with the rest of their night. She drunkenly rage texts Benji for blowing her off before dropping her phone and losing her balance, falling into the subway tracks. Luckily, she's rescued by a man waiting for the train, and she thanks him by puking on his shirt. As she hydrates, he helps her hail a cab, and she realizes that it's the cute guy from the bookstore. Kismet, right? They share a cab back to the city, as it's the least that Beck can do after he saved her, and they get to talking about literature and poetry, as Joe notes that everybody in New York is a poet. He shares his favorite authors, which are literally the same ones that Beck has on her nightstand like it was meant to be. A sleepy Beck leans her head on Joe's shoulder as he explains that he grew up in New York and left for a little while to chase a girl, but came back because he missed the city. When they get back to Beck's place, she thanks him for saving her life, and they share a moment like they're almost going to kiss, but Benji interrupts and bangs on the cab window. Beck tells him how Joe saved her life after she fell in the subway tracks, but he couldn't care less that Beck almost died. He just thanks Joe for being a bro and hurries for Beck to let him inside. Beck gives Joe her email since she must have lost her phone when she fell into the subway, remember that? And then she heads inside for another disappointing dicking from Benji. The next day, Beck returns to the bookstore to thank Joe again for saving her life, and to apologize for running off, she brought him a copy of the Da Vinci Code as a present. So Joe asks her out for a drink sometime, and Beck says yes. The next day, she finally gets a new phone after going a whole 24 hours without one, activating it and connecting it to the cloud to sync with the messages from her old phone. On her way to class, Beck calls Benji and leaves him a voicemail wanting to know that he's okay, but admitting that it's really annoying that he hasn't texted her back. When she arrives, Professor Leahy asks her to lead the class and reaffirms their plans for drinks the following night. Back at home grading papers, Beck texts Peach that she's worried Benji isn't answering because he's in some kind of trouble, but Peach assures her that he's probably off partying somewhere. Just then, Beck gets an email from Joe confirming their plans later, and she lets him know that she'll be free at 6. They meet up for a walk and talk, and Beck confesses to Googling Joe but not being able to find any social media, and he admits that he's just an old-fashioned guy and prefers the real world. He says that he loves books, and he just wants his life to be about what he actually loves, which just about charms Beck's pants off. Just then, Peach calls with the news that Benji is missing after he went to meet with somebody and never came back, and Beck is like, yeah, I told you I was worried. So she leaves to meet with Peach to decide if they need to call the police. But before they do, they see a new post from Benji revealing that he actually is just gone partying like Peach originally thought. The pair are joined by Annika and Lynn before Beck has to meet with her professor for drinks. Annika reveals that she hooked up with her professor to pass her bio class and encourages Beck to sleep with Leahy and keep her eyes on the prize. Peach doesn't love the idea, and Lynn suggests reporting him, but Beck can't risk her position as TA and jeopardize her housing. Peach reminds Beck of her party tomorrow before she leaves to reluctantly meet up with her professor. As they talk, he encourages her to be more direct in her life beyond her writing, offering himself as safe practice considering he's married. And then he tries to flatter her as he reaches under the table to touch her leg, causing her to jump out of her seat and grab her coat, calling him repulsive for touching her. But realizing his position, she starts to apologize and he blames her for his advance, saying that she was flirting with him and blames her outfit choice as an invitation. Embarrassed and angered by her rejection, Professor Leahy says that he's releasing Beck from her TA position as she's clearly overworked. After he leaves, Beck calls up Joe, inviting him to the restaurant to finish their talk. They chat at the bar and Joe checks up about her missing friend, but Beck says that Benji's just an idiot and it's nothing to worry about, and then they play a game guessing the story of couples around them, and Joe points out a couple that he proclaims to be them in 30 years, coming on a little strong, but Beck loves it. They have a laugh about how well they both kept fit, and she tells him about her professor hitting on her. He reassures her that it wasn't her fault without even knowing what happened, but Beck is starting to think that she just attracts men with serious issues because this kind of thing happens all the time. She invites Joe to Peach's party and has another moment where they almost lean in for a kiss, but she grabs his drink instead. The next day, Beck hangs out at Peach's as she's getting ready, checking on Benji's latest post, and she spills about her night with the professor going wrong, prompting Peach to write Beck a check to cover her rent. That night, Beck and Joe arrive to Peach's party, and Peach immediately steals Beck away. Later, Beck heads outside to find Joe on a balcony, and he asks why she brought him, noting that he doesn't have much in common with anyone here. But she says that's what she loves about him because she feels like an outsider around these people too. Beck laments that she has to cash the check that Peach gave her, and Joe encourages her instead to show some teeth. And for the third time, I think I should have kept count, Beck considers kissing Joe, but she leans her head on his shoulder and says that she's glad they're friends. As they're leaving the party, Joe is called out by somebody saying they were Candace's friend. Joe introduces Beck, and she finds out that Candace is Joe's ex, who left suddenly to run off to Italy with some guy. But it's weird vibes, so Beck makes an excuse to get them out the door. The next day, Beck shows up to Professor Leahy's office, asking him to reconsider revoking her TA position and placing her with another advisor. When he declines, she reveals that she's spoken with multiple other women with stories of his harassment and threatens to expose him if he doesn't transfer her. He relents, reassigning her as a TA to Professor Maud's English class. Beck heads to the bookstore with a thank you donut for Joe for giving her the advice to show her teeth and do what she needs to survive. He accepts her offering of a plain glazed donut, old-fashioned and classic, and she pulls him by the apron across the counter as they kiss before she heads off to class. The next day, Beck meets up with Joe to walk her home. She broaches the topic of Candace, still on her mind from the confrontation at the party, and Joe says it's the same old story of thinking that you're right for somebody and realizing that you're not. She heads inside her apartment and checks again on Benji's tweets, finding that he's hooking up with randos while he's still not responding to her texts, so she finally gets mad enough to tell him off and declares that Benji is dead to her. In the morning, Beck heads to class early to formally meet Professor Maud and first encounters Blythe, who explains that they meet for workshop on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She challenges Beck to bring her A game, noting that Professor Maud is a tougher critic than Leahy. Beck compliments Blythe on one of her essays, saying that it was so illuminating that she tweeted it, and Blythe comments on social media being the next great genocide. Bold take, Blythe. After class, Beck meets up with her friends, telling Peach all about Blythe and overhearing Lynn and Annika discussing a dick pic that she got. On the topic, Beck mentions the guy that she was hooking up with the prior night, and Peach is surprised that Beck is already sleeping with the bookstore manager, but Beck says that it was just some random guy from Tinder because Joe is still a maybe. Peach pulls her aside to ask if Beck is being her best self right now, but Beck assures her that she's just exercising Benji from her system and exploring her options, which includes the bartender, who she invites back to her apartment for another down and dirty hookup. So down that they break her bed frame and it falls to the floor. In her next class with Professor Mott, Blythe remarks that her biggest fear in her writing is being unremarkable, making a point to look right at Beck. Professor Mott wraps up class announcing for Blythe and Beck to send a piece of writing to their classmates to review for discussion in Thursday's class. Beck heads home and tries to write, but struggles with her bed held up by books, and before she can, move to the couch or the table, she gets a text from Joe inviting her on a shopping trip because he needs a new side table, and how crazy is that? It's like he read her mind. They head to the store and Beck tries out a few beds, not sure if she should get a queen or a king size, and Joe jokes that no bedroom in New York is big enough to fit a king size bed. Beck's phone goes off, reminding her that she hasn't even started her writing for class when she receives Blythe's writing submission, which is so good that it just makes her feel even worse. She lays back on the bed and asks Joe if he thinks that she's unremarkable, and he brushes the hair out of her face as he tells her that unremarkable people don't worry about being unremarkable. And that works for Beck because they start making out and he almost goes down on her in the middle of the store, but she snaps back to reality when she hears people nearby and rushes off. Back at the car, Joe gets a call about an issue at the bookstore, so he drops off Beck at home. She tries to assemble the bed frame on her own, but realizes that it's a good excuse to invite Joe back to help her put it together. They have a drink to celebrate the new bed, and Beck apologizes for being uptight in the furniture store, saying that she does like him, but she was just in her head after reading Blythe's story. And Joe encourages her to get out of her head and forget Blythe, forget everybody, and just write what she wants. He asks her what hits the hardest, and Beck opens up about her dad's addiction affecting her as a kid. Feeling vulnerable, she takes a sip of her drink, and Joe sarcastically remarks that she has nothing meaningful to write about. They lean in for a kiss, and just as they're about to christen the new bed, there's a knock at the door. Beck jumps up to get it, and it's Peach having tummy trouble, conveniently flaring up right after Beck told her that Joe was coming over. Peach needs Beck to accompany her to the emergency room, and Beck asks Joe to drive them, but they get stuck in traffic, and his car totally stinks, so they don't make it very far before Peach insists that they get out and walk. At the hospital, Peach is treated and she thanks Beck for coming with her. Beck assures Peach that she can always count on her, and then she asks Peach what she thinks of Joe, but Peach is not impressed, giving a weak, "Yeah, I like him." Beck says that she might really like him considering that she could be ready for a serious relationship with Joe, a normal, decent guy who shows up and comes through, unlike Benji who fucked around and fucked off. Peach isn't so fond of the idea since working at a bookstore comes with financial limitations, and she believes that Beck needs somebody who can take care of her so she can be happy and free to spend her time writing. Beck pushes back that Peach isn't being fair, but Peach claims that she's calling it how she sees it and invites Beck out to eat, but Beck has to get home and heads off, leaving Peach behind. She calls Joe to invite him back again to pick up where they left off, and he asks about Peach, who's fine now, but he points out that Beck complains about not being able to write and then runs off when Peach beckons with her fake medical condition. She asks him about coming over, and he says that he can't, and even though she apologized for the bad timing of Peach interrupting them, he tells her that she's sending mixed messages and he has no idea what she wants, and he hangs up on her. She's taken aback but realizes that he's right and she doesn't know what she wants, so she starts rejecting his calls for the rest of the night while she tries to sort it out. Arriving late to class the next day, Beck has her pages in hand, but it would be too awkward to read and discuss on short notice, so they reschedule her review. She heads to the bookstore after class, rehearsing what she wants to say before spotting Joe. Beck admits that she would do anything for her friends, even if sometimes she does hide behind them, but she didn't need Peach to show up as an excuse not to write because she would find any excuse not to write because she feels like she could just be one page away from confirming that she's a terrible writer. She admits that if she's sending mixed messages, it's because she doesn't know who she is, so she couldn't really know what she wants. But on the flip side, she also calls out Joe for not sharing about himself either. On one hand, he's a nice guy who's all romantic, but then he tries to go down on her in public, which makes her feel like he's hiding something. Beck remarks that she's never even been to his apartment or met any of his friends and basically has no clue who he is. To show her exactly who he is, Joe leads Beck to the basement of the bookstore where there's a cage for the books. He explains that the cage protects the rarest books that the store owns, which are vulnerable and sensitive to light and temperature and humidity. He offers to take Beck to his apartment anytime that she wants and says that he wants her to meet his friends, but this place is the most important to him because these books are more worthy than most people. Joe says if she wants to know who he is, then this is it, and Beck takes his hand, thinking that it's nice to meet the real Joe. She leaves and visits Peach's house where she officially deletes her Tinder account. Peach congratulates her and accepts that maybe a simple life with Joe is the right one for Beck as she notices a book missing from her shelf, noting that it's a book that Joe is looking at her party. When Beck returns home that night, she calls Joe to invite him over and they finally break in the new bed for all of 8 seconds. Joe rolls over and they lay in silence for a minute before Beck gets a text and heads to the bathroom to check it. It's her dad, the captain, texting to confirm their plans this weekend to meet at the Dickens Festival that she forgot she agreed to, but she can't cancel since he sent her money for her bed and her phone bill, and then another $500 to get an outfit. Outside, Joe says that he's running to the store and leaves while Beck texts her dad back from the bathroom. The next morning, she texts her friends about their failed hookup as she's packing her new outfit. Lynn and Annika shoot back quips and gifts before finally asking if he's worth it, prompting Beck to consider the question and decide to give it one more shot. She heads to Peach's to borrow a pair of boots. As Peach is searching her closet, she urges Beck to ghost Joe already and move on, and she brings up her lost book again, with Beck jumping to Joe's defense, but Peach retorts, "Who said anything about Joe?" She tries to bring Beck along to a weekend getaway, but Beck says that she has a writer's retreat in Rockland, so Peach yields and encourages her to believe in herself and her writing, which just makes Beck feel worse about lying to her. Come the weekend, Beck meets her dad at a motel where she gets ready for the festival while he invites her to a vacation for Christmas, but Beck can't commit or doesn't really want to. Her father is noticeably disappointed and visibly surprised by her outfit, which was absolutely her intention. At the festival, the captain asks about Beck's mom and her brother Clyde, and then he asks about school before ignoring her answer to pick up a call from Nancy, which leaves Beck feeling like she might as well shut up forever. When they find Nancy, she ties a hat onto Beck's head, then grabs her dress, warning that she's slipping a bit, but Beck bites her tongue and thanks her for the ugly hat. The captain and Nancy walk off, and Beck wanders the festival until she's left chatting with her father's stepdaughter, who breaks the news that he's about to cut Beck off financially in preparation for the baby that he's having with Nancy. Upset that her father is starting a new family instead of fixing the one that he left, Beck stops at the bar for a drink. She texts Peach, who tells her to get back to writing before calling her to accuse Beck of being with Joe after finding out from Ethan that he was out of town to the same place. Beck tells Peach that she's not lying, but she can't deal with this right now, hanging up on her when she thinks that she sees Joe, but it's just some guy, until she keeps walking and she does see Joe. He says that he comes here every year, which would make sense for a bookseller to come to a book festival, except then he admits that he's lying and he came to the festival because he wasn't happy with how they left things. Joe explains that he guessed she'd be here when he googled the nearby restaurant in a picture that she posted, which is admittedly a little creepy, but Nancy and the captain walk up just in time to prompt Beck to introduce Joe, leading Nancy to invite him to dinner. Beck realizes that Joe just met her not dead dad, so she's got some splaining to do. She reveals to Joe that she found her dad overdosed when she was 12, and while he did survive, he didn't stick around after he relapsed again, so she decided to go on as if he had died. Beck admits that it was wrong to tell Joe that he died and gives him an out if he thinks that she's a fraud, but he's understanding and apologizes for everything that she's been through. They meet the parents for dinner, but it goes sideways when Nancy accuses Beck of investing nothing in the family and treating her father like an ATM. Beck lashes out at Nancy, angry that she got the version of her father who's sober, while Beck was stuck with him when he was at his worst, and he doesn't even remember the few good memories that he made with her. Beck sarcastically congratulates Nancy on the baby and storms out. Joe follows her to a gazebo and encourages her to talk to her dad, or at least write about him. But Beck is not in the mood for somebody she barely even knows to be giving her advice on her family situation, so she tells Joe to leave her alone. Her dad comes to say goodbye and leave her with some money for the hotel room. Beck admits that it's hard to see him with another family, like she's waiting for him to come back and be himself again. She says that she misses him, and he doesn't say anything, so she brushes it off and reveals that she tells everybody he's dead. She remarks that he was a good sailor, and he offers for her to tell him about it sometime, like over Christmas in Vermont, but Beck remains non-committal. That night at the motel, Beck can't sleep, and she pulls out her laptop to write her short story for class, inspired by her father. When she arrives home the next day, she sends her story out to her classmates and receives validation from Blythe that the story gave her chills. Beck shows up to Joe's apartment, having gotten his address from Ethan, which you're not supposed to do, but she comes on to him and they hook up, so I don't think he's too mad about it. Afterward, Beck apologizes to Joe for being a hostile goose when he was just calling her on her shit, and she admits that he was right, and she's glad to be with somebody who's not fake or lying about who they are. She steps to the bathroom to text her friends about Joe, excited about their redo romp, and Peach is less than thrilled, but she can deal. Beck and Joe start dating, and she stays over, falling into a morning routine of sex, showers, and salty avocado toast. One morning, Beck is writing when they overhear Joe's neighbors Ron and Claudia fighting through the walls. She asks Joe if he can say something, but he insists that he doesn't really like to get involved in other people's lives. Beck heads to class and then off to a meeting with a student when she gets a call from Joe. He tries to convince her to run off for a romantic weekend, but she argues that she has TA duties, and she shows up late to meet Louise, asking her to say goodbye to Joe for her so she can hang up before they start reviewing her latest pages. Beck compliments and encourages her writing with a small critique of a story that she referenced, and she challenges challenges Louise to read a feminist work from a woman's perspective. Louise accepts her challenge and thanks Beck for her support, with Beck noting that it sounds like a goodbye speech, leading Louise to share that she's dropping out of school to move home and take care of her sick mother. Beck gifts her a book, writing in an Bronte quote, reminding Louise of her independence and autonomy to pursue her own path. Later that week, Professor Mott calls in Beck to talk about her writing. She acknowledges how hard it must be for Beck to write about her dad, saying that she was sorry to hear about his passing, but she's glad that Beck stuck with it and connects her with an agent to help her score some writing jobs. The next night, Beck has a date night scheduled with Joe, who describes an elaborate Fitzgerald and Zelda-themed date, but the date doesn't come to fruition as Beck gets a call from Annika, who needs her to come over because she's upset and having a meltdown over a video that was posted of some drunk comment that she made years ago. The next morning, Peach meets Beck at the bookstore so she can share the news that her professor is connecting her with a writing agent. Peach regrets the timing because she was going to call her agent friend Roger Stevens to connect him with Beck, knowing that he represents very famous writers. She says that Beck could go ahead and write for magazines, her face deriding it as trash like what Annika does, or she could introduce them if Beck decides that she wants to be a real author. Beck takes her up on her offer and Peach calls for Joe, insisting that they need to shut down the bookstore to host a party so that Peach can invite Roger. It's short notice, but they pull it off, and Beck arrives heading straight to the bar for a drink to calm her nerves. She fears that the only writing the agent will be interested in are her essays about her dead dad who isn't dead. She takes a second shot as Joe reassures her that most authors make up their personas. They toast to Fitzgerald and Zelda as Beck takes a third shot and joins Peach to meet Roger before she leads them to chat and exchange numbers. The next day, Beck is hanging out at Joe's apartment while he's gone, and Peach shows up looking for her laptop, convinced that Joe stole it. When he returns, she confronts him and demands to know where her laptop is, asking if it's in some little hidey hole where he stashes all of his stolen goods. Joe insists that he doesn't know what Peach is talking about, and she questions where he went when he left the party halfway through. Joe contends that he can afford his own laptop, but he believes Peach if hers is missing. He asks if there's any reason that someone might mess with her, which reminds Beck that Peach told her last week she was feeling unsafe in her home. Joe points to her status as a Salinger and wonders if somebody could be creeping on her. Considering the possibility, and since it wouldn't be the first time, Beck suggests calling the police, but Joe asks Peach if she tried to use Find My Computer yet. You know, the first thing you do when your laptop is missing? Beck and Peach check on her phone to see that her laptop is located at her own house. So yeah, maybe we got a little worked up for nothing, Peach. Peach storms out without an apology, and Joe calls out Beck for not coming to his defense. She asks what she was supposed to do considering they're always fighting, but he insists that Peach is next level vindictive and she's had it out for him since day one. Beck asks why he hangs out with her friends if he hates them so much, and he claims that it's the only way that he would get to see her, but she doesn't have time for this drama as she's already late for her deadline, which triggers Joe to blurt out that he doesn't care. He claims that he heard Peach talking at the party, saying that Beck wasn't ready to be a writer, and knowing that Roger isn't going to sign her because he thinks MFAs are a waste of time. Beck calls Joe an asshole, telling him to just admit it if he doesn't believe in her, instead of coming up with some ridiculous story because he's jealous of Roger. She remarks that the last thing she expected from Joe was for him to be unsupportive as she leaves to meet up with Roger as he rides downtown for lunch. The meeting quickly reveals itself to be another Leahy situation as Roger puts his hand on Beck's knee, clearly not interested in her writing and admitting that he only skimmed it. She pulls away and he tries again and propositions her, forcing Beck to shove him away and call for the driver to pull over. Beck sends Peach an SOS to meet her and confronts her over setting her up with the creep who never wanted to sign her, thinking the whole thing was meant to humiliate her. Peach asks what happened, and Beck explains that he never read her work and just wanted to get high and bang her in a limo. Peach claims that she didn't know he was using again, but Beck doesn't give a shit and yells at Peach for sending her there and throwing her under the bus. She cites Joe overhearing Peach at the party and says that he was right when he said that Peach lives to cut down her friends, revealing that she knows Peach was behind the Annika video. And now she's sabotaging Beck because she'd rather pick apart her friends than admit that she's not being her best self right now. Beck admits it's exhausting to be Peach's friend, and Peach contends that she was just trying to do Beck a favor, but Beck gives up and walks away as Peach calls for her to come back. She heads to Joe's to apologize because it turns out he was right about Peach and the agent, and she wonders how Joe can see these things so clearly in her life when she can't see them herself. They make up and make out until Peach starts calling. Beck answers her phone to tell her to stop, but hears that she's slurring her words and she admits that she took some pills. Peach goes quiet, so Beck and Joe rush to her house, finding her passed out in bed, and Beck gets her to the bathroom to throw up. Joe says that they should take her to the hospital, but Peach refuses because she doesn't want to be committed for a whole 72-hour hold and just asks Beck to stay with her. Knowing that this isn't the first time Peach has tried to kill herself and explaining to Joe that when Peach needs her, she really needs her, Beck sends Joe home and stays with Peach over the weekend. But the next morning after Beck returns home, she gets a call that Peach was attacked in Central Park, so she packs up her laptop to head to the hospital to be with her. After being discharged, Peach is too afraid to stay in her own home, so she comes back to Beck's apartment for a few days to rest and recover. One day, while Lynn and Annika are visiting, Joe stops by and Peach calls him out as the one that warned her she had a stalker. Annika mentions that they're trying to figure out who it is, suspecting it could be somebody Peach knows. Unnerved by the reminder, Peach asks Beck for some tea, so she heads to the kitchen and Joe follows her, asking how long Peach is going to be staying. Guys, she was attacked. Can you have a little sympathy? He suggests that she might be too much responsibility for Beck, and Peach interrupts to ask Joe to leave because his male energy is interfering with her healing space, but he probably heard her considering he's standing right here, so he leaves, taking his germy balloon with him. The next day, Beck stops into the bookstore to let Joe know that she's heading out to Peach's family's place in Greenwich for a few days, and he asks her about school, but she reminds him that Peach almost died. So he accuses Beck of risking her future for the same person that tried to sabotage her career, and he calls it crazy, saying that he has to be honest and accuses Peach of manipulating Beck. He asks if she really can't see that Peach is holding her back from becoming her own person because she wouldn't be able to control her anymore, and he claims again that Peach's suicide attempt was fake. And Beck asks if she faked the attack in the park too, as she's getting really tired of all his victim blaming. He tells Beck that Peach is in love with her, and that's her cue to leave, as she sarcastically thanks him for his honesty. Beck leaves for Greenwich with Peach and wakes up the next morning to Peach's big plans to spoil her best friend for the day. When they get home that evening, Peach insists on Beck trying on the new dress that she bought, but Beck just wants to take a bath to relax. After her bath, Beck rejoins Peach downstairs, surprised to see that she's invited their old friend Raj, especially considering that Peach wasn't comfortable around male energy. But Peach says she's feeling much better now, and Beck notes that she's the only one feeling that way. So Peach acknowledges that Beck is still mad at her, but Beck doesn't believe that Peach actually understands. Peach apologizes to Beck for insulting her poetry, but preaches that she needs to live a life worth writing about and offers for them to both move to her family's flat in Paris. Beck pulls back, proclaiming the idea to be crazy, but Peach insists that she just take a beat and trip on it, saying that the move could be a new beginning for the both of them. So they head back into the room and toast to old friends and new experiences as they take the Molly that Raj brought. As they catch up, Beck admits that she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. Peach says that she's having writer's block, and Beck says that she wants to write a book about an injured soul, somebody who doesn't feel like they have a place in the world. Peach starts playing with Beck's hair, calling for Raj to come feel how soft it is, leading Beck to call for a platonic massage train in the bedroom. But when Peach gets carried away, rubbing Beck's back, and starts kissing her, Beck indulges for a moment before pulling away and rolling out of the bed to run downstairs and text Joe. She tells him that she's done being mad, and he jokes about coming in from the ledge before apologizing again. She says that she doesn't want to go to Paris, which he has no context for, so he's just like, noted, no Paris. The next morning, Beck gets ready to head back to the city. Peach assumes that she just has things to take care of before they move to Paris, but Beck explains that she belongs in New York and she's not ready to give up on her dreams yet. Peach doesn't see it as giving up, but taking a leap of faith. But Beck points out that Peach is asking her to quit her MFA program, leave her home and her friends and her boyfriend. And Peach interjects that she's known Joe for like a minute and demands that Beck have the self-respect to dump the creepy retail loser, which is really harsh. Peach, literally, what has Joe ever done to you? Peach claims that she's just being real, so Beck challenges her, asking about the kiss last night, but Peach brushes it off because they were all high, and she says that Beck is making drama out of nothing, and actually insists that Beck was the one leaning into her and being initiating. Beck reaffirms to Peach that she is her friend, so she understands that her family might not accept certain things, but Peach lashes out and tells Beck not to make her desperate need for attention about Peach, calling the entire conversation insane. Beck asks if they can just rewind for a second, reminding Peach that she came along to take care of her, so she's not coming from a place of attacking her. But she admits that even Joe saw how Peach is manipulating her, and Peach remarks, of course Joe's behind this, as if he's orchestrating some big thing to turn Beck against her. Peach declares that Joe is nothing, Joe is trash, and says that she would die for Beck, doubting Joe could say the same. But Beck finally tells her that she needs a break. So Peach says fine, leave and slum it with the bookstore clerk. Until Beck announces that her Uber's here, and Peach is like, oh, so you're just gonna leave and slum it with the bookstore clerk? What about my stalker? Beck says that she'll send Peach the number of a private security company as she turns her back on her to walk to the car. Peach yells after her that Beck just uses people, but she doesn't break her stride and returns home to the city. Later that night, Beck gets the call that Peach killed herself, meaning her last conversation with her best friend was an argument that ended with Beck leaving Peach feeling abandoned. Over the next week, Beck attends Peach's funeral and leans on Joe for emotional support. As he's leaving her apartment, he says that he's left her fridge stocked and grabbed a couple Xanax off of Annika and offers for her to text him if she needs anything, but Beck asks if he can stay, and he confirms that he can stay as long as she wants. During the first month of dating after the funeral, sparks are flying between Beck and Joe as she throws herself into their relationship to avoid her guilt and grief over Peach. They chat over pancakes in bed, and Beck recounts her first kiss, admitting that it didn't happen with the boy she actually liked, but 2 weeks later with his friend who just went for it, leading Beck to confess that she wishes she could do it over as she's always had a hard time sorting out the good guys from the bad boys. They play Scrabble with made-up words, concocting their word Everythingship. Joe calls it a meeting of the minds, bodies, and souls. One night, Joe surprises Beck with a low-budget starry night in her living room to redo her first kiss, giving her the chance to finally kiss the right guy. As she's struggling to sleep at night having nightmares about Peach, Beck gets fired from the yoga studio after falling asleep while leading a class. Realizing that she needs to deal with her grief, she starts up therapy again, seeing pothead therapist Dr. Nikki. When she comes clean to Joe about losing her job, he offers her a position at Mooney's. Beck accepts, and they commemorate her first shift at the bookstore, asking Ethan to take a picture of them. He mentions an author that reminds Beck of Peach, and she pauses after bringing her up, realizing that it's the first time she talked to Joe about Peach since the funeral and decides that she'd rather save it for therapy. Working at the bookstore, Beck is pretty careless as she falls into a depression, leaving books in the general vicinity of where they should go, failing to organize by genre, and showing up late for her shifts. Joe approaches her about being late, and she opens up to him about the dreams she's been having of Peach that keep her up at night. She confesses that it leaves her too tired to write, and she's falling behind in school, and now she feels like she's failing him too, so it's like the only good thing in her life right now is therapy, where she can just go and let it all out and not have to worry about who she's letting down for an hour. Of course, Joe doesn't get it, asking if it's the only good thing, and Beck rolls her eyes and walks away, regretting that she even said anything. One night after a late shift, Beck sets out dinner in the cage in the basement of the bookstore. Yeah, remember the book cage? They have dinner, and while Joe does comment that one errant candle could destroy the entire collection of rare books, they don't blow out the candles. Beck mentions Peach again, feeling a little more comfortable to talk about her after she worked through some of her thoughts with Dr. Nikki. She explains about a sleeping bag she carried as a security blanket when she was a kid, even when it got old and gross because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. But one day she lost it, and while there was a sadness to it, there was also a sense of relief that she didn't have to be the one to get rid of it. Not that Peach is anything like an old sleeping bag, I guess the metaphor sounded better in therapy, but it seems like this might be coming back up because Peach always made a big deal about Beck's birthday, which is in just a few days. Peach always planned everything and made sure that Beck felt special, so Joe volunteers to take over this year, but Beck insists that she doesn't want a big party, she just wants to keep it small and low-key. But small and low-key it is not when Beck arrives to the bookstore the night of her party to find it packed with people. As she walks up to Joe, she overhears him telling Lynn how rude and selfish she is. She asks to speak with him and they head to the office where she yells about how this isn't what she wanted. Even though she appreciates the gesture, she says that she can't be at a party without Peach so soon and just pretend that everything's okay. He brings up the relief that she mentioned the other day as if there wasn't also a sadness component to it, and grief isn't a straight line. Joe says that Beck has been hard to read lately and he asks where she was, saying that he called her and texted her, and he questions why she smells like 3 glasses of rosé. Beck lies to cover the start of her affair with Dr. Nikki, telling Joe that her therapy session ran long and that she went for a walk and stopped in a bar to journal. Joe presses, asking why she didn't call him, and she says that she just forgot and lost track of time. But he gets down on his knees and tells Beck that they can get through anything, pleading with her to tell him the truth. But Beck scoffs at him because this is a little crazy and you need to get up off the floor. Joe stands up and demands to see Beck's phone. She laughs, asking if he's serious, and it seems like he is, throwing the first kiss stuff back in her face, saying that she said herself she had a hard time with good guys. Beck laughs again and grabs her phone, offering it to Joe, but warning him that if he looks through it, it means they have no trust between them, and if they have no trust, then they have nothing. She asks if he trusts her, but he doesn't say anything, so she grabs her bag and leaves. The next morning, she shows up to Joe's apartment with an apology donut, and their fight is forgotten. But going forward, things are off in their relationship as her affair continues with Dr. Nikki. While they were in the hot and heavy honeymoon phase before the party, things freeze over after, and Beck rejects Joe's advances, feeling irritable when she gets text messages that she can't answer while she's hanging out at his apartment. One day, Beck leaves Joe's to meet up with Dr. Nikki, telling him that she'll see him after class, but as she's walking, he texts her asking what she's doing. Considering she just told him that she was leaving for class, she doesn't text back but instead walks to the park where she circles around and runs into Joe, who appears to be following her. She confronts him and he tries to say that he was just in the neighborhood, but she knows that he's lying. He admits that he's suspicious over her lateness and being secretive over her texts, saying that she's been acting different lately. Joe asks if she's sleeping with her therapist and Beck lies, saying that she's not. He demands to know who it is that keeps texting her, and Beck says that it's her friend Emma Fox from Brown. Realizing that Joe went through her texts, Beck seizes the out and breaks up with Joe, saying that they have no trust. In therapy, talking about the incident, she recounts to Dr. Nikki how upsetting it is that he followed her and admits that the more he wants her, the less she wants him. Beck understands that Joe feels like she was hiding something because she is trying to hide that she's an ugly mess under a socially presentable and acceptable version of being a mess. And after all this time, she still hasn't dealt with what happened with Peach or Benji or her dad, and instead of using any of it to inspire her writing, she's just been hibernating with Joe, which is making her start to resent him because she needs space to heal and work through her shit, but she can't do that when he's always right there trying to make things okay for her when she's the only one that can do that for herself. So Beck concludes that if Joe really loves her, he would give her the space to heal on her own. Of course, she said all of this in therapy, though Joe has no reason to know any of it. But again, it's like he can read her mind because he shows up to her apartment the next day and apologizes, saying that his jealousy got the better of him and maybe he's being stupid to let her go, but he thinks that it might be what she needs, so he will. Over the next 3 months, Beck focuses on herself and her writing, and it really pays off when an essay that she writes about Peach goes viral, landing her a book deal through the agent that her professor connected her with. But when Beck tells Blythe that her agent isn't happy with her latest pages, they head back to her apartment and Blythe demands that Beck surrenders her phone. She deactivates Beck's social profiles, deletes her apps, and unplugs her router before considering procuring a typewriter from Joe, which obviously prompts Beck to ask about him, but Blythe doesn't bite and leaves Beck to her low-tech writing. She tries to get through her writer's block, but she just can't focus, so she ends up plugging her router back in and jumping on Facebook to look up Joe's new girlfriend Karen Minty, immediately feeling like she isn't Joe's type. To get some fresh air and maybe run into Joe, Beck takes a walk to his neighborhood to grab dinner and gets her chance to meet Joe's girlfriend when they're out for a walk as well. Their meeting is short and sweet, with Joe congratulating Beck on her book deal and then heading off with Karen to get something to eat. Beck texts him saying it was good to see him, which kicks off their reconnection, but when Beck fezzes up to it in therapy, Dr. Nikki questions if Beck is repeating her pattern of falling back in with guys who aren't good for her just when things are going well as a form of self-sabotage. Beck lies to her therapist and herself that that's not what she's doing with Joe, and when he texts her to congratulate her again on her book deal, she asks if he wants to see her author photos. He asks what she's reading, and she sends a picture of her book conveniently placed on her lap post-shower. Back in therapy, Dr. Nikki accuses Beck of flirting and tells her that the only people who really know a relationship are the people that are in it. He goes on to explain that their relationship is like a house, and Beck is just a little mouse that wants to weasel her way into a house that isn't hers, leading Beck to the conclusion that she should back off. But she asks what if the man in the house wants a little mouse, and Dr. Nikki points out that people catch mice in traps, and feeling trapped was the reason she ended it in the first place. She rolls her eyes and leans back on the couch, defeated by the knowledge that she should stop texting Joe and move on. But luckily, Blythe and Ethan already invited the both of them to a moving party, so she has an excuse to see him again. As they finish emptying the truck, Beck brings Joe a beer to inform him that they've been invited to a housewarming party on Thursday. He admits that he had doubts about Ethan and Blythe, but they're adorable together, and Beck agrees that they're obnoxiously cute, and they cheers to the Joe and Beck moving company. The next day, Beck texts Joe asking if they can meet for an hour so she can get his opinion on her latest pages, and he replies saying it's a date. Beck shows up early to meet on the ferry, rehearsing what she might say as she overlooks the water waiting for Joe to arrive. She gives him some pages to read, and she's relieved when he approves, saying that she rewrote the ending so many times that she was starting to spin out. She considers writing another short story from a male perspective if Joe is available for consultation, and he agrees, prompting her to guess what he's thinking. Beck seizes the chance to offer up a trusty "you're thinking what I'm thinking," and Joe leans in as they kiss and hook up on the upper deck of the ferry. Joe immediately decries the act as a mistake, and Beck agrees, saying never again, but not meaning it in the slightest. The pair start up an illicit affair, hooking up behind Karen's back. A badly behaving Beck backslides in her progress and starts bailing on therapy to bang it out with Joe. By Thursday, Beck heads to Ethan and Blythe's housewarming party, awkwardly greeting Joe's new girlfriend as Little Karen Minty because she's already a little tipsy. Ethan pulls Joe away to help open bottles, leaving Beck and Karen alone to chat, which makes Beck realize that Karen is actually good for Joe, unlike her. Later, she explains to him that they need to break it off because she's too much of a mess to be good for him. She wishes that she didn't shut down and push him away after Peach died, but she admits that she was afraid of how much she needed him, and she says that Joe deserves to be with somebody who is perfect for him and leaves the party early. The next night, Beck is sitting in her apartment when a rock breaks through her window. She looks outside to see Joe, who says that after thinking about what she said at the party, he believes that they belong together, and even if it's messy, they can make it work. Beck invites him in and they hook up. Afterward, Joe is sweeping up the glass and Beck shares the good news that her editor loved her new pages, adding that she was so happy all she wanted to do was call him and tell him. Later, when Beck is out for a walk, she runs into Karen, who admits that she actually owes Beck for showing her who Joe really is. Beck tries to leave, but Karen warns her to be careful because she's no Candace. She asks what that means, and Karen comments that whoever Candace was, she still has her claws in Joe. And Beck turns again to leave, but Karen continues, saying that one day, Joe will do to Beck what he did to her, or worse, he'll do to Beck whatever he did to Candace. When she gets back to Joe's, she hears him wake up during the night yelling Candace's name, so she finds a way to bring it up over breakfast the next morning, asking if she's still in France. Joe corrects her that it was Italy, but he doesn't know and he doesn't really care. Beck asks why they broke up, and Joe says that she dumped him because they were thoroughly incompatible, and he admits that she was the woman he left New York for, but it was a mistake. She's not entirely satisfied with this answer, but Joe has to bail on lunch with her friends to run payroll to Mooney, so it works out because it means that they can spend lunch dissecting Candace's Instagram, even though she hasn't posted in a year. Lynn says that Beck shouldn't worry since Candace is in Italy, but she's not so sure that she is, thinking that Candace could still secretly be in New York. Beck worries that Joe could still be in love with her, but Annika calls out her irrational fear that anything good for her will fall apart. Just then, Annika notices a man across the coffee shop, and Lynn calls out to him, sarcastically inviting him to join them. She's surprised that Beck doesn't know who it is, explaining that he's a private investigator hired by Peach's family because they don't believe that a Salinger would kill themselves. Lynn and Annika head off to an appointment, but Beck needs to send Blythe notes, so she visits Ethan at the bookstore to ask about Candace. He isn't eager to get into it, but Beck presses him, insisting that something must have happened, and Ethan admits that Joe was really messed up when Candace dumped him and he disappeared for a week, and then came back to work depressed and wearing the same sweatpants. But then he met Beck, and she brought back the light, Ethan says, telling her that she makes Joe happy, so she should just let it go. Back at home, Beck continues to Facebook stalk Candace until she remembers meeting Maddie and heads to the bar where she works to ask her more about Candace. She finds out that Joe and Candace dated, but Maddie wasn't surprised when it didn't work out because she heard a rumor that Candace cheated on Joe with her music producer. She thought they worked through it, but one day Candace ghosted all of her friends and disappeared to Italy. Maddie says that Candace's brother Jimmy has this crazy theory that she's actually dead. Beck stops at a cafe to do more research, finding an article about the music producer's sudden death falling off of a roof. And then she calls a psychiatric hospital to speak to Jimmy, claiming to be his sister, only to find out that he passed away 6 months ago. Beck returns home and waits for Joe to arrive to confront him, demanding to know what happened with Candace and where she is. Beck feels like she's going crazy because there's no evidence that Candace was in Italy and nobody has heard from her since she's left, and it's weird to move to Italy and not post any pictures. Joe tries to slow her down, asking who hasn't heard from Candace, and Beck tells him that she talked to Maddie because he won't tell her anything. She points out that Candace cheated on Joe, and then the guy she was cheating with fell off of a building, and then Candace disappeared and Joe went to Italy to chase her, but if she was never in Italy, then where did he go? Beck says that Jimmy thinks that Candace is dead, but Joe interrupts, explaining that Jimmy also thought he was a Russian spy and that he blamed Joe for Candace having him committed. Then he pulls out his phone and shows Beck Candace's new Instagram with pictures from Italy, and he admits to her that Candace cheated on him and broke his heart, finally opening up about what happened after Beck made a fool of herself, getting carried away with her mind going to the darkest place. Joe is upset that Beck could think he was capable of hurting Candace, but freshly reassured, she knows in her heart that that's not Joe and he could never hurt somebody like that. He admits that he did lie about where he was the week after Candace left him and takes Beck to visit Mr. Mooney, explaining that he was so wrapped up in Candace that he neglected to visit, which left Mooney stranded on the floor for days after having a stroke, so he stayed for a week while he recovered. They walk back to Joe's apartment and Beck's phone starts going off with text messages from Dr. Nikki. Joe notices and Beck tries to play it off. As they get back, Joe gets an alert of the alarm going off at the bookstore and tells Beck to head inside. But when he gets back, he confronts her over cheating with Dr. Nikki. He asks if she has ever fucked her therapist and shouts for her to answer him when she hesitates, and she does admit that she cheated, saying that it's over now. Joe goes off, ranting about how all he does is support her and dote on her, and she turned around and dug into his past and dissected his life like he was some kind of monster that could hurt people, but maybe she's the monster here. Beck tries to explain that she never loved anybody the way that she loved Joe, and it scared her because she didn't think that she could have had that kind of love, so she sabotaged herself. Joe softens as he hears that she loves him, and all is forgiven. The next morning, they wake up and Joe heads out to grab waffles for breakfast. Beck gets dressed and texts her friends that things are all good with Joe when the neighbor kid Paco knocks at the door to return a book, cluing Beck into a secret hiding place in the bathroom. As curiosity gets the better of her, she looks up in the ceiling to see if Joe has anything hidden and finds a wooden box. Beck opens the box to find an assortment of mementos, including her own underwear, her journal, her tank top, her lost cell phone, and a necklace that she recognizes from Candace's photo. She finds Benji's phone and Peach's phone, and slowly realizing what this could mean, she finds a glass jar and opens it to find that it has teeth in it. She drops the jar and it shatters, but she rushes to clean it up and hide the box away as she hears Joe return. She makes an excuse to leave, but Joe stops her, insisting to help with the cut that he notices on her hand. When he heads into the bathroom, Beck gathers her things and makes another excuse that Annika texted, freaking out again, but as she reaches the door, Joe slams it shut and attacks her. The next thing she knows, she wakes up in the cage in the basement of the bookstore. Yeah, remember the cage? The book cage? Apparently it's a people cage now. Beck sits up and surveys her surroundings, not seeing Joe anywhere. She stands up and starts shouting for him as she bangs on the glass and struggles looking for a way out. Joe appears outside the cage, I guess he was just lurking in the shadows, and Beck yells at him for hitting her and asks why she's locked in the glass cage, and he insists that it's only temporary because he didn't want her to freak out. But he admits that he can't let her out until she sees the truth and understands everything he has done for her, which turns out to be murdering her boyfriend, murdering her best friend, and locking her in a cage. Beck falls to the floor sobbing, and Joe assures her that they're going to get through this before he leaves her locked in a cage in the basement of the bookstore. Joe returns that night with a box and shows Beck a video from a party where it looks like a kid died, and Joe insists that Benji had no remorse for it, proving he was sociopathic and dangerous. And then he says that Peach was obsessed with Beck, showing her pictures of herself that Peach was hoarding because, according to Joe, she wanted to own Beck and trap her. Says the guy who has her locked in a cage. He claims that her stolen underwear and tank top are just mementos like his t-shirt that she's wearing, insisting that her life has been better since she met him. She just didn't know why or how, which are exactly the problems here. Joe says that love means you'll do anything for somebody, and Beck looks down at the teeth in the box and then back at Joe for confirmation that they're Benji's, and he admits that he burned the body. She asks about Peach, and Joe tries to say that it was self-defense, but Beck can't hear it as she starts wailing, fearing that Joe is going to kill her, screaming that he's a freak and a murderer. She tries to find a corner, but Joe follows her around the cage, insisting that he would never hurt somebody he loves, but Beck knows that he definitely hurt Candace, so he leaves her alone in the basement again. The next morning, Beck wakes up to Joe standing over her. He says good morning as if he doesn't have her locked in a cage, and she screams, so he runs out, locking the door behind him, and points to a typewriter that he left her so she can write while she's locked in a cage. Did I mention she's locked in a cage? Joe remarks on the time that he spent in the cage when he was younger, which, is a lot to unpack, and he thinks it was good for him, so it will be good for Beck, like the low-tech writer's retreat she's always wanted. But Beck just dismisses him, saying that she feels bad for him. That evening, Joe returns with dinner and reveals that he's learned about the private investigator looking into Peach's death. He notices that Beck hasn't started writing, and she says that she's waiting for that surge of inspiration she was promised. Beck tries to charm Joe, praising him for worrying about the neighbor kid when he has bigger concerns, and then she tries to trick him, asking if she can use the bathroom, but taking a glance at the stairs that prompts Joe to back away. Beck screams that she's been wrong about Joe, and he says that if she sees the cage as a prison, then she'll remain a prisoner, but if she sees it as a chance to grow, then maybe they can have a future together. Joe says that he fell in love with a writer, so maybe she should be writing. Beck screams in frustration before settling down to reflect on how she got here and sitting down to write. She believed that he saw her and fell in love with the mess that she was, but he just fell in love with his idea of her, and her life now depends on playing that role. When Joe returns the next evening, Beck apologizes for going crazy and asks what's wrong. He says that he was visited by the PI and doesn't think he bought a word that he said. Joe sits down and declares that he's not a killer, reasoning that if he was some premeditated, cold-blooded monster, then he wouldn't have left behind any evidence. Joe accuses Beck that she would love for him to go down for something that he did for her, but she disagrees and says that he can't expect her to be calm while she's trapped in a cage, but insists that she is trying to understand him. And she says that she worries for Paco because she thinks about people who don't have anyone, and Joe going to jail would leave Paco without anybody there for him, so she advocates for figuring out a way through this so they can both be there for Paco. Speaking of, Joe leaves to go check on him and Beck gets back to writing. When he gets back, Beck presents him with her pages that she wrote, telling her story of Dr. Nikki twisted to frame Joe's crimes as his, to implicate him as the suspect in Benji and Peach's murders. Beck admits to Joe that nobody has ever loved her the way that he does, and she understands how much he did for her, so she wants to do this for him, saying that she's glad the cage gave her time to think after she found the box, so that she didn't do anything stupid. Joe knows that he scared her, so he'd understand if Beck hated him, but she reassures Joe that she loves him and offers to stay in the cage until he can trust her because she knows that he'll take care of her like nobody ever has. She keeps laying it on thick, telling him how they can take her story public and go somewhere to start their life because she knows that she's better with him than without him. He stares at her through the cage, hanging on her every word until he unlocks it to step inside and kiss her. They embrace, and Beck grabs a hidden key from the typewriter and stabs it into Joe's side, escaping the cage and locking him in. Flailing on the floor, Joe pleads with Beck to wait and laments that he knew it was too good to be true. Beck asks if he actually believes what he does is justified, calling him insane when he insists that it is. She says that her lying or cheating are nothing compared to Joe's stalking and violence and murder, and he says that there isn't a line he wouldn't cross for her. Beck yells that she didn't need somebody like him swooping in and cleaning house. Joe insists that she did because her life was a mess, but she reiterates that it was her life and her mess. She scoffs at Joe, thinking that she would be grateful to him before announcing that Joe is the bad thing that he should have killed. She calls out everything Joe did just being an excuse to justify creeping into women's lives and violating them, and taking out people he's always resented like Peach and Benji because he gets off on the power and control. She tells him that he isn't special, just broken. She could never love him, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Beck turns and runs up the stairs to find the door from the basement is locked, so she yells for help and Paco opens the door to the hallway. But when Beck explains that Joe is dangerous and he's killed people and he's going to kill her, he backs away and closes the door? Beck runs back downstairs to get the key, but sees the cage is empty. Joe appears behind her and says that he didn't want it to be like this, so Beck tries to run and grabs a mallet, hitting Joe in the head and knocking him to the ground. She gets his keys from his pocket, but struggles to figure out which one unlocks the door, and Joe runs up the stairs behind her, pulling her back down to the basement and tackling her to the floor. He climbs on top of her, wrapping his hands around her neck, and she tries to fight him off as Joe strangles her to death. Following her death, Beck's writings were sent anonymously to Blythe, who published the collection of stories and poems titled The Dark Face of Love. Dr. Nikki Andevine was arrested on suspicion of Beck's murder and convicted based on evidence and remains recovered from his property. And over 7 years later, Beck's actual killer was caught. In 2025, serial killer Joel Goldberg was arrested and convicted for the murder of Guinevere Beck. His additions to her book were redacted, and The Dark Face of Love was republished, to more praise than before, restoring Beck's voice and reclaiming her narrative, allowing her story to outlive the man who stole her life.